So, I solved my unemployment by becoming minorly famous on TikTok. About 4 months ago, I opened the TikTok app, I sat down and recorded a video and said that I would post a video every single day until it became financially lucrative or I became employed. And the day has actually come, so I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the journey to getting here. I was actually able to find a job through TikTok. Who would have thought? I want to talk about the journey of the past 4 months of being on TikTok, of becoming a micro-influencer and finding a job. I also just generally want to talk about what I've dubbed my year of rest and relaxation, which was essentially the year-long stint where I was not full-time employed, and it so happened to have lined up with my first year post-grad. So I have a lot of stuff to say and talk about. I can honestly talk about this for hours, so let's just get into it. In December of 2024, I graduated from NYU with my BS in business and political economy, and I double minored in public policy and management and psychology, and I honestly didn't have a concrete plan for what I wanted to do post-grad. All I knew is that I really wanted a job, and ideally that job would be in some form of creative operations. I had been applying at that point for about 6 months for a full-time job, but come December, I still hadn't found anything for post-grad. But I knew I had 6 months from January, or I guess 5-ish months from January to the end of May, when I would actually be walking in the graduation ceremony to kind of get my shit together. And I knew that I had 2 months at the beginning of 2025 to backpack Asia with my friends, decompress, reassess. It didn't feel as pressing or as scary. So in January and February, I spent those months in Asia with some of my best friends. I literally had the time of my life and feel so grateful that I was ever even able to do that and have that experience. We did Japan all the way down to Singapore, and it was a magical time. And a huge part of the reason why I would dub 2025 to be my year of rest and relaxation, even though it had its trials and tribulations. So I come back from Asia in March, and I kind of spend the next couple of months in my hometown living at my parents' house, trying to apply for jobs. I redo my website. I am pouring a lot of energy into putting out all of these vlogs documenting my time in Asia, and I am a bit pressed. I know the clock is ticking and I need to find a job pronto. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen, but what does end up happening is I get an email from the New York Times saying that they want to interview me for this internship position. It's an advertising project management position within their in-house ad agency studio kind of thing. I can describe it to you, but I'll also just put the name here and you can search it up. I was really shocked by this because I was pretty sure that I had been rejected from the position back in October of 2024 when I had originally applied. But hey, I wasn't going to be like, hey, actually you rejected me from this. So I ended up interviewing last minute. At this point, we were getting down to the wire about 2 to 3 weeks before I was supposed to go back to New York City to graduate. So I interviewed, I think I did 2 interviews. I got the job literally like a week before coming back to New York, and I was so relieved. It's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted a full-time job. I didn't really want to be a post-grad girly going into another internship, but gotta make lemonade out of lemons. So I come back into the city, I graduate, I cross the stage, I get my diploma. Mind you, my hair is in a bob because during my 6-month hiatus of the first part of 2025, thought that, nothing really mattered. I was a new born again person after backpacking Asia. I was wrong, but I cut a bob. So I had my bob as I walked across the stage, and then I packed up my things out of my old place that I was living in the last 2 years of college. I moved in to my friend's place. I was going to sublease his place for the next couple of months, and I started working at the New York Times. While I was working there were a lot of things that I really loved about the job. I think the people that I got to work with were really great, and I was able to learn a lot about the way that kind of studio runs and like how to manage different archetypes of teams. So it was a really interesting time. I will say I did have a lot of cognitive dissonance working there that summer. It's a particularly volatile time to be working there. The New York Times, like in terms of their like internal messaging, really pride themselves on freedom of the press and journalism with integrity. And let's say some of the things that came out of the op-ed in the newsroom were not up to my standards and what that might look like. And so that was a little bit interesting kind of working through that and experiencing that this past summer. And also it just didn't end up being the right time because they weren't going to hire a post-grad, like newly post-grad person for one of the roles they needed filling on the team that I was working on. And so around like end of July, August, I kind of realized that and started looking for full-time work again. So the job hunt began again. At that point, it was like getting down to the wire. I had a couple weeks left at the New York Times. I had a couple of weeks left on my sublease before my friend was supposed to move back. And I was like, shit, fuck. I don't know what to do. So I ended up, for better or for worse, taking the risk and signing a new lease in the apartment you see now. And I was like, I'll figure it out. Like, I'll find a full-time job. Maybe things will work out for me, especially because up until that point, a lot of the opportunities that kind of had come my way or doors that had opened were like in the nick of time opportunities, like 1 week before I needed to move back to New York. And that happened more than once. It happened twice. And so I was like, well, I don't know, maybe things can work out last minute. They didn't. I wasn't able to find a job. All through September, I was really hustling to like apply to so many jobs. I cannot tell you in the past year and a half how many jobs I have applied to, probably over 1,000, and how many rejections I've gotten or how many people have just straight up ghosted me. Insane. Anyways, all through September, I was facing no, rejection after rejection. And it really stung because at that point, it wasn't a kind of thing of like, oh, I'm spending these couple of months in my hometown, like at my parents' house, and like I have this buffer of time for when I'm supposed to figure it out. Like at this point, I felt fully launched into post-grad life, and all of my friends and stuff were figuring out and moving on, and like I couldn't do that because I didn't have a job, and I just felt super stagnant and super pressed about this, honestly. So I'm applying all through September. It doesn't work. And then at that point, I think I have some kind of conversation with one of my friends, and he's saying like, well, you really have no reason not to start a TikTok account or a social media account. At that point, I had been like thinking about it as maybe like a side hustle or like a hobby, personal project, but for a lot of reasons, I didn't want to be an influencer. I didn't want to be a content creator. My main reasons were I didn't want to make money based off of whether people liked me or not, and I felt like there was a huge lack of privacy that comes with being an influencer. And there are just so many drawbacks that I had already thought about and like had kept me from doing the damn thing. But he was like, you really have nothing to lose, so why not? And I was like, okay. Well, honestly, I didn't really have anything to lose at that point, so he was right. So I pull out my phone, I shoot my first video, I talk to the camera, tell them what's up, how I'm unemployed, and how this is going to be kind of like a personal project of me growing this TikTok account. Over the next 4 months, from October to, I guess now we're sitting in the early days of February, I basically work so hard at building a TikTok presence. I basically have worked almost every single day, maybe not a full 9 to 5 hour span, but worked every single day towards producing content, posting content, making sure things are performing well, reiterating on TikTok. And all the while, I'm still applying for full-time jobs. I just don't really post about it. I'm going almost to the end for a lot of these job application recruitment processes. I'm like getting to the final round and then I'm receiving it now. Very heartbreaking, very discouraging. But I will say TikTok in some ways was like a saving grace because it felt like something that I could have more control over and work towards, and it felt more low-key, more within my grasp, becoming famous and becoming a micro-influencer than finding a job after a year and a half of so much rejection. We get to December, and that's when I'm actually able to start making money for the first time on TikTok, make $150, which yay. In January, I made about $650 to $700. So that was great. Love that for me. It's still not enough to pay the bills. So if we go back to that first video when I say, but until this becomes financially lucrative or I find a job, at the end of December, it was giving I need to find a real job because this is just not going to be sustainable for me. The amount of time I'm pouring into it versus the amount of money, quite frankly, that I'm getting out of it just doesn't make sense. And I need the stability of a full-time job. At that point in December, though, it was like the holiday season. No one was really hiring or posting new jobs. So I decided to take the holiday couple 2 to 3 weeks off from job hunting after months and months of looking. And honestly, it was such a nice reprieve. And then I come back to New York in January after spending some time at home for the holidays. And I get a couple of emails from a couple of companies saying like, we heard that you're looking for a job, or like you're looking to make a new move in your career and we're hiring for X position and we think that you might be a great fit. Are you interested in interviewing? First of all, what a change of like tone for me. I'm so used to like groveling and begging for companies to hire me for these like very junior positions that are very underpaid. So to have people like kind of reach out to me and say like, hey, saw your content, really love what you're doing, would you be interested in working for us and in X capacity? So that was already really exciting. I interviewed with a couple of companies that just like didn't pan out, even though they were the ones to reach out to me. It just wasn't a good fit. And then I finally, about a week and a half ago, got the call that I got a job, which was like, I cannot even tell you the amount of relief that I felt in that moment and from that conversation after months and months and months, almost a year and a half, if we go back all the way to the summer of 2024 of applying for jobs and just hearing no's, 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 and no's. That kind of gets us to the present moment. I'm going to be like diversifying my content across all my platforms, as I've talked about recently, and I will be starting my new full-time job, which I cannot believe I get to say that. But yeah, I want to talk about all of the things that I've learned. I feel like my following kind of falls into two different pockets of people. One being the people that really love like my video essay, think PC videos on art history, pop culture, politics, sociology, psychology, economics, that kind of vibe. And then my other part of my audience is like really interested in content creation and growth strategy and influencing. And so hopefully this will be like a really good mismatch / introduction to like who I am, how we got to this point. And some of my videos that do the best are kind of what I learned. This is going to be a more personal level, what I learned from this whole journey and my whole year of rest and relaxation. But I hope it's useful in some capacity. The first thing that I learned is that closed mouths don't get fed. I already knew this. I had been learning this working up to the past year, but really, honestly, being upfront online, putting yourself out there in places where many people can find you, being frank and honest about what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and opportunities you're looking for is literally the only way that the company that just now hired me found me in the first place. That doesn't just apply to TikTok, it also applies to any place ever, in any public settings, being open and honest about goals you have, dreams you have, things that you're looking for. You never know who might be able to help you out. The second thing that I learned over the past year is how to be a better storyteller. For one, on TikTok, just learning how to verbally communicate, visually communicate a story of some sort, a thesis of some sort, in a really short period of time that's concise and accessible to many people has been a skill that I've really developed on TikTok. So I feel really proud about that over the past couple of months. Also, just the process of interviewing and pitching yourself over and over and over and over again. I got to the point of where I didn't even need to practice that part for interviews because I was so good at telling the story kind of my professional and a little bit of my personal life. Practice really does make perfect, and clear, concise, and authentic storytelling is so powerful in any setting. So across the board. The next thing was getting comfortable with rejection. I faced so much rejection to the point that it was really discouraging and really disappointing and really difficult to get through the latter half of last year. But in doing so and in enduring all of that rejection, I got so comfortable with it. The fear of someone saying no or saying this opportunity is not going to work out or we don't have something for you right now really dissipates once you hear it over and over and over again. It's not so much of a shock anymore. And in a lot of ways, obviously, that's discouraging. But in other ways, it makes you feel more comfortable taking calculated risk and putting yourself out there because you already know that you've been rejected before or you've gotten a no before and the world didn't stop spinning, you know? The next thing is how to use that rejection and that comfortability with rejection as a space to reconsider where you are in your life, if that makes sense. I think because I was receiving so much rejection and I was at just like a low point, it gave me the freedom, like when you're at rock bottom kind of, it gives you the freedom to reassess where you actually want to be going and makes you a little bit more risk inclined because you have less to lose. And so in all of this rejection, I took more risks, like starting a TikTok and posting every day and applying more for creative roles that were actually really exciting to me, even if I didn't get them. In addition to using that rejection as a space to rethink things or using rejection as redirection, it also made me a lot more comfortable with non-traditional paths. At first, it was really, really, really difficult to be like falling behind my peers, falling behind my friends, and feel like everyone's kind of moving on with the next chapter of their life. They're starting their job, you know, and I'm still at the restaurant. But after a while, it does make you more comfortable. It's kind of like exposure therapy. You become more comfortable with not having the same path as everyone else, of figuring things out on your own time, of carving new career paths that you didn't think were possible. And so that has been definitely a skill and kind of like a muscle that has developed over the past year. The next thing is that you really, really need champions in your life through all of the no's and all of the rejections and the difficulties of the past year. Thing that has really supported me and made my dreams possible and made this video right here possible is the fact that I have so many champions in my life, whether that is my parents who have helped financially support me during this time, or friends who have said that my crazy goals and dreams were realistic and completely doable, even if I could tell that they were kind of unsure themselves. They have just really supported me in my non-traditional up and down journey of the past year, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And if you have certain dreams, maybe your dream is not becoming a micro-influencer, because it surely was not mine. One of the greatest privileges you can have as a creative or an artist who is trying to do something a little bit different is to have people that believe in you. That's a kind of capital that's irreplaceable. The next thing is that influencing is generally very misunderstood by the general public, including myself, because before I even got into this, I had my qualms about influencing. I knew there were specific reasons I didn't want to do this. Just being so public facing is pretty vulnerable, and yeah, I knew going into this there were many drawbacks. The drawbacks became even more apparent when I started creating. One, it's a lot more work than I ever thought it would be. Particularly for me, I'm not a lifestyle centered influencer, so I don't just do day in my life or get ready with me's, and I don't want to say that just as in like a demeaning way, but in a way that like a lot of my content is produced, and I would use the word production because I script, I research, I shoot, I edit in a way that's very time intensive. And when I promised to post every single day, I didn't know that I'd be getting myself into this really intense like workflow. And I don't think that a lot of the public really thinks about this, because a lot of the public thinks about the biggest influencers out there like Alex Earl, and they have whole teams behind them. So when we think of the average influencer or micro influencer, there's so much work that goes into it. And I guess in that same vein, a lot of the work that influencers do is not considered it's not considered a form of labor. And so a lot of people are either asking for a lot of things that are for free, or they're asking for a lot from a person that they are not paying, or a person that is not getting paid very well by a platform. And B, just generally doesn't understand the relationship between influencers and brands. And I think influencers get a lot of slack for a lot of good reasons. I think a lot of the critique of influencers and the brand deals they take, and their relationship with consumerism and materialism and promoting consumption, is a little bit of a like hairy place to navigate, because at the end of the day, influencers are a part of a new industry that is all encompassing of a lot of different traditional job roles: entertainment, advertising, filmmaking, and they're doing it all for these companies, or doing it for wages that are actually a lot more efficient than hiring full teams who could do those things. And I just think there's a general mismatch of the audience and the influencer, and the amount of work that goes into a lot of these people's content, and just viewing what they do as work. There's also a giant veil in terms of an ability for the audience to recognize what's real and what's not. People will say this all the time, but I genuinely think it's not in people's skulls, that like you do not know the person behind the camera at all. You know like 1% of who they are. Whatever they decide to show is very filtered, including myself, and the amount of time they spend on your screen is very small in comparison to the full picture of their lives. The last thing that I want to talk about very briefly in terms of like my expectations versus reality on influencing is that since starting to post on the internet, I've been constantly on for the past 4 months. I'm always checking my TikTok. I'm always looking at the performance of the videos. I'm always thinking of video ideas. I'm always like working on scripts or shooting or editing. And again, that just goes back to like an underestimation of the work that, I wouldn't even say influencers, that content creators, people who are creating content for you to consume, put into their work. And I could just not reiterate that enough. The last thing I want to talk about is maybe the most important thing, which is that I would never advise somebody to do what I did. I have been incredibly lucky throughout the past year to have had the opportunities I've had, to have the support that I've had, and to have been able to grow my TikTok quite rapidly and to use that to my advantage and eventually find an opportunity for full-time employment. I think it's an incredible gamble, an incredible risk, and incredibly unrealistic to try to do this. For starters, I have had an immense amount of financial support from my parents. I am incredibly privileged from that perspective, and I don't think it would be possible for me to have grown this platform without financial support, because it honestly took almost the same amount of time as a traditional 9 to 5 to create the content I have created over the past couple of months. I wouldn't have been able to create that content at that caliber for that many days in a row if I was holding a full-time job doing that. So a lot of people are like, how do you balance employment, or how do you balance being a full-time student and creating content? You can definitely do it. You just would have to produce content at a much lower scale, and I think it would be much harder to grow. So that's just something to keep in mind. That is a very just frank observation, that it's very difficult to grow on this app intentionally. Sometimes you get a struck of luck and you just hit the jackpot with a very viral video and you're able to kind of run off of that, as so many creators have been, but that's like 1 in a million. If you're just like an everyday average person like myself, it really takes a lot of work to grow on this app, and with such an unpredictable algorithm, unpredictable audience, I would never suggest it. It is such a gamble, and unless you are as privileged as I have been, I don't think it's going to be the way that most people find a job opportunity in this market. I've just been incredibly lucky, thanking my lucky stars literally every day, but I would never advise anybody to do this. Overall, the past year has taught me a lot about myself on a personal level, on a professional level, and I have been really lucky to have support so that this year could be somewhat a quasi year of rest and relaxation, because I didn't work full-time except for 3 months out of this year when I had planned to work full-time almost the entire year. It gave me a lot of space to navigate post-grad life and to do it on my own terms. And again, because I've been so privileged to have the support of my parents, I was able to do that without risking a lot. And yeah, I'm really interested in seeing where this goes, where my career takes me, where this new full-time job takes me, where influencing takes me. And I would love to hear your thoughts on my journey if you've gone through something similar. But yeah, this first year of postgrad has been nothing at all what I have expected, and I'm sure the next couple months will be unexpected as well. I'm excited for you to be here. I'm excited to be here, and I'll see you in the next one.